everyone, I'm Tali, this is Farrell, and we are Bored of It, and welcome to the next instalment in our Best Board Games for Two Players, not specifically designed for two players, series.
And hopefully you've seen this series before, but if you haven't, what we're doing is we're covering games that we've been playing lately that we really enjoy playing at two players, even though they're not specifically designed for two players. And the reason we started the series was because it's very easy to find lists of really good two-player games, the best two-player games, but it's a lot harder to know that if a game you're interested in that will play up to 4 players to 6 players will be worthwhile at 2 players. So we're just going to go through how these games differ at 2, 4, why we like them at 2, what's going on with those games, and we've got 9 games for you today. So let's get to them, but first, if you would consider subscribing, if you find this helpful, or informative, or interesting, we would really, really appreciate it. But without further ado, we'll go to the newest game first.
Ooh. Okay, so first up we have Ra, which is one of the newest games to our collection. And this is an auction game, and the reason that you want to be auctioning and bidding is to gather all of the tiles in a centralized marketplace for the purposes of scoring points from various kind of set collections or objectives, basically, scoring every round. So we have the reprint of Ra, which is a classic Rainer Knizia game with artwork done by our favourite Ian O'Toole.
Yeah, so this is 2 to 5 players, I believe. And classically, auction games aren't that great at 2, but I think this has a lot of interesting mechanics that make it really kind of tactical and interesting at 2.
Definitely.
So one thing is that when you bid for these tiles, you kind of trade, you have like tokens, a bit like Nidavellir, and you basically put one in the middle and you swap out the one in the marketplace. So the game will start with a value 1 in the marketplace, and you might have a value 9, 6, 5 little tokens on your board, and you'll swap it out, but now you have a 1 token for the next round. So every time you're bidding, you are winning the tiles if you win, but you're also swapping out your bidding power. Yeah. And it might be better, it might be worse.
Yeah.
And
so it just adds like a bit more depth to the auction other than just bidding and losing your money, right? So I think that's why it works quite well.
Yeah.
At 2.
It's a really interesting wrinkle that is interesting enough that kind of you could say the lack of auctioning with other players doesn't matter too much. Then you have the kind of Ra track, the Sunboat track, where if you pull specific tiles, it moves this boat along the track, and if it reaches the end, the round ends immediately. So there's a bit of gambling going on there as well, where you can let the other player like bid everything, and then you have lots of turns left, except if you keep pulling those tiles out, it ends the round shorter. Yeah. But I think we found it really interesting at 2. I think there was a lot to like. It's probably maybe the game, one of the games on this list, the most that will probably be better at 3 to 5. Yeah. But also this list isn't, you're only ever going to play us at 2. I think one thing that's really nice to have are games that you can play at 2, but you can get out when you have friends or family. Definitely. That you can enjoy it both, because obviously you don't want to be stuck with the game. You'll only enjoy 4 players. Yeah. Then you need 4 players every time. Yeah,
we would be more than happy to play this with 2 people, and I'm sure we will continue to do so.
Yeah, and the beautiful production is a big bonus.
Oh yes, definitely.
Anything else you want to add?
Nope.
So we'll move on to game number 2.
Okay, so our next game is Lands of Galzyr. I'm hesitating because we were calling it Lands of Galzyr for ages, and we realised it was called Lands of Galzyr. Now I really struggle. So this is a really fun, cooperative, narrative, like story-driven game. You'll be traveling.
Not always cooperative though.
Not
Can
always
be competitive.
Yeah.
When we were like the only people in the entire world that played it that way.
And I preferred it. Still do. You'll be traveling around different regions of Galzyr, interacting with a app which is online, kind of interacting with different people, places, and type in a number in the story and then have the story read to you by the other people in the game. And then you do skill checks, make choices to move the story on, but most importantly, to get prestige points, which is, your victory points and what you need to win the game. So in the cooperative version, you're trying to get prestige points together, but obviously in the competitive, it's the first one to 10 points, essentially. But it's also, just to say, it's a bit of a light legacy game as well. So it is the sort of thing you can just, have one game of and put away. But some of your items and like companions and your skills that you have, your character that you choose at the beginning will stay with you.
Yeah. So this is for 1 to 4 players. And obviously, when you have cooperative games, they generally do work quite well at 2 players, 3 players, 4 players. Yeah. Some might be like kind of scaled for 4 players only or something, but on the whole, you expect them to work well at 2. And this is the case here. And also with the competitive mode, works great at 2. But I think one reason we might actually prefer to play it at 2 is just because this is a game where it's very story driven. A lot of it's through an app and you're reading passages and making choices. And basically when you're not the one reading or the one rolling, there's not a lot in it besides to listen to other people do things. And it can take a while. It's not a long game necessarily, but it can take a while because sometimes there'll be like a paragraph and then there'll be another paragraph and maybe another paragraph. And in the meantime, they're rolling and they're making decisions on what to do or how to manipulate those dice. And, if you're playing 4 players, 2 people are just sat there, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're playing co-op, you want your co-op players, I can't think how to say it. The other players to be doing well, but it doesn't really impact what you're doing and what your action is, what they do, apart from the points. So it's
and there's no requirement for them to be where you are. You all just do as good as possible, basically. Yeah. You can help each other out, but you have to be in the same space. And a lot of times the quests you have will be asking you to go to other spaces, right?
Yeah, for me, this is personal preference, but narrative kind of story-driven games, I do like them, but they're one of my least favourite genres, because I have no imagination, basically, and I zone out sometimes when you're reading passages or something. But I love the fact that you read to the other person because it does just keep you involved the whole time.
Yeah, because it is to you, right? Not just, here's the story, everyone listen up.
Yeah, and obviously there's interaction between, when there's 2 of you, you're reading the story and their choices to the other player, they're listening and they have to respond back to what they want. You input it on into the app. So it's just a really nice game for 2 players because both always involved essentially. This is one of my favourite story-driven. I think it is my favourite actually. All of them.
So, although obviously it's good at any player count, I think we would just prefer it at 2, so that you're always involved and it doesn't go on too long. Although with the right group, you probably would have a lot of fun if you get into a bit of role playing and voices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Lands of Galzyr, which we also have a review of.
Okay, so next up we have Heat, which is a really fun racing game where you'll be playing cards to basically make your race car move forward along a track. But you do have to manage your hand because if you go too fast essentially and move too far in one turn, you might spin out and you might lose concentration. And you kind of get these heat cards in your hand which clog up your deck if you change 2 gears up rather than 1 in a turn, because then the higher you are in gears, the more cards you can play, but you will get a heat card which is going to clog up your deck. So fairly light, quite family weight friendly, but very fun because obviously it's a race and it's very tense and that's always good fun.
So this one goes from 1 to 6 players. So again, a good one to ask the question, is it any good at 2 players? And although it says 6, I'm sure there'll be some sort of expansion to play with 8 at some point because there's spaces for 8 on the ranking, and there's also spaces for 8 coloured components, even if they're not in the base game.
I did wonder this yesterday when I put it away. I was like, where are the other 2 cards?
Yeah. So I assume there'll be some sort of expansion that brings it up to 8. But this is one where it's, you could argue it's more fun with more players because it's a race game. There's more like interaction. Everyone's kind of yelling at the table. There's bouncing off of each other because you have the slipstream mechanic. But the thing about a race game is usually only one person can win. So depending on how head-to-head you like your games to be, you can argue that at 2 players, you're still getting that kind of same thrill experience.
Yeah,
and
you've got to come first, otherwise what's the point?
But what's really great is one of the modules included is bots, and they are run really easily. Very simple mechanism to play against. So even if you're playing at 2 players, you can fill up the game with no real upkeep to up to a full 6 players if you wanted. So these are kind of nice little things that does make it a game that's worth playing at 2.
Definitely.
Have a good time. There's a lot of different modules to explore, so there's a lot to keep it interesting as well.
Yeah, I think with the bots as well, when we played last night, it was quite funny, wasn't it? Because, well, not really so much for me, because I thought that I had won and the bots were in last and they just had a really good turn and overtook me. So
it made me feel much better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because I would say it created tension, but it didn't because the bots were kind of behind us all the way around and they ended up like in the last turn having a really big turn and coming first, which is kind of funny because you do have to worry about them in a way, right?
But yeah, so I think this is something that is definitely worth your time at 2 players. I think it's probably a game you'd want to consider if you're going to play it at a range of player counts. But definitely don't be worried about playing it at 2 that you won't have a good time. Because, I mean, if you like race games, it's still a race at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely.
So that is Heat. And who knows when you'll be able to get a copy. Ours is in Danish, and that's how we got this. So that's a pro tip for you. Buy it in Danish. But that was Heat.
Okay, so next up we have War of the Ring, the card game, which is a reimagining of the War of the Ring board game, which is a big epic battler with lots of minis, a huge board representing the regions from Middle Earth. That game can take quite a few hours. So this is a kind of more accessible, quicker kind of version because it's just played through card play, essentially. So each of the players represents kind of the different sides, the Dark Lord versus the Free People. And you'll be battling over battlefields and paths, which are essentially kind of scenes or places from the universe.
Yes. So one thing is that this is primarily marketed as a 4-player game, even though it's 2 to 4 players. And this is because it's meant to be played as a team game where 2 players on each side, each player controlling a unique deck full of, subsections of characters. Like one player might be Gondor and Rohan, the other might be wizards and hobbits, for example. And so they're working together, but they kind of have their own unique combos and ways of interacting with different things. So we didn't know what to expect with the 2-player game, but actually we were pleasantly surprised by how well it plays at 2 players. It definitely feels like, I don't want to say, it sounds wrong saying any other head-to-head card dueler, but what I mean is you're not losing anything. It doesn't feel like it wasn't meant to be that. No,
I think if you never knew that it was supposed to be 4-player, you really wouldn't have any idea because it is just that same vibe as, like you say, other card head-to-head duelers.
And in fact, there's almost more ways to play if you're going to play it at 2 players because I think there's only one way to play it 4 players, the way you say it was intended. But then at 2 players, you have kind of an intro scenario, which is recommended as a way to become introduced to the game. which is shorter, but much more structured. You play with specific cards, and it takes place over the first book movie. Then you have the 2-player duel variant, which rather than decks being split up, you merge them all together, so all the Free Peoples and all the Dark Lord for each player. And then you're going to be drawing more cards, you're going to be playing more cards, it's kind of quicker, snappier, more tense. And then you can also play the kind of 4-player game with 2 players, except you have those 2 separate decks and you need to make sure you're keeping them separate. So a bit more upkeep there. But that 2-player duel and the kind of intro scenario, we really enjoyed those. They were really tense, tight, kind of head-to-head duel games.
Definitely good fun. Yeah, it's definitely a game where you really have to think about what cards you're playing when, and it is simple, let's say, in terms of the components. It's just cards, but there's really a lot of depth to it because it's best to play certain cards at a certain point. You can hold them back. Should you hold them back for a next round and kind of forsake playing them now? And yeah, lots of interesting decisions to make as to when to activate certain powers. So there's a lot going for it. Yeah,
so we really enjoyed it too. So check out War of the Ring, the card game. Up next, we have Rococo, a game about attending a ball for Louis XIV, the Sun King. I hope it's the right Louis. And you're essentially trying to become a well-respected master tailor. You're going to design all the frocks and the gowns for this big party, and you want yours to be the ones noticed by the nobility. So you have a bit of hand management because you take actions with workers who are represented by cards, and they kind of cycle through in a certain way, so you want to be careful who you play when and which you buy. You also are kind of doing contract fulfillment because you're going to be taking designs which require certain components and then collecting those components to turn them in and make said frock or a dress and put it on the board somewhere. There are a few other little bits you can do to score. There's a bit of area control for different halls where you want your dresses to be, frocks. But yeah, so I believe it is for 2 to 5 players or 1 to 5 players. I can't remember if there's a solo mode. But why is it good at 2 players?
Yeah, so we were almost, disappointed in a way, or we thought it would be more different when we played with more players. But what we actually found was, with regards to the area control, if you're fighting to put your frock or dress in a hall, then you're fighting regardless of how many players there are. So, if it's just me and you, we're up against each other, and you might keep adding a frock or a dress where you can to take control. But if there's 1 or more players thrown in, you're doing the same thing. There's still that tense battle. Of course, the halls are going to get filled up more quickly, but the idea is that you still area control.
I think the thing is, the way the area control is that you're just adding 1 at a time.
Yeah.
So it's not like one of these games where suddenly somebody does something and it shifts, and it's much better if you have 3 or 4 players. It's just you have 1, now I have 1. If someone adds 1 more, then someone's going to win that. It's kind of
until it's full, the game state of each area control doesn't change that much. Like you say, you can't steamroll in with a load of troops / people in the frocks and dresses.
Frocks.
In 1 turn, right? And we also kind of found that the fight for the resources, the cloth, we thought that would be more tense as well because, it can be a little bit annoying if someone takes a green piece of cloth when you needed a green one. But the thing is, many of them have sort of 2 or 3 pieces of cloth on 1 resource, and you might not need all of that. So it's never that difficult, even if someone takes the best one that maybe has 3 pieces of cloth, you can get another one with the colours that you need. It's just less of it. And a lot of the time you're overspending on cloth anyway. So it's just not that difficult to get the resource. It's maybe a bit annoying, but it's, Yeah,
I think also there are cards that have bonuses. A lot of the cards have bonuses when you play them, and some of them are draw 1 from the bag for free, draw 1 from the bag for 1 coin or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you can also get more as well besides that marketplace. But it's like you say, I think we expected it and we were excited to play with more players. And it just didn't really,
that different.
We thought it'd be leaps and bounds ahead, and it was actually quite close in the experience we had, both for the area control, the fight for resources, the fight for what frocks and gowns you can grab, fight for spaces. I think maybe when you flip the side of the board and then you have kind of a 4 or 5 player side of the board as opposed to 2 or 3, I think maybe with 4 players and 5 players and more spaces, it will be more kind of fun and interesting. But I mean,
it's just scaled to...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like we said, we were really enjoying it at 2 and we're excited to play it at 3. 3, almost disappointed by how similarly it felt based on our kind of anticipation. Yeah. But a really good game though, a game we really enjoy, a game that's really clever and we really want to play with more people.
Yeah. And in a way a bonus that actually we found this just as good at 2 because it means that we can play it more often.
Exactly, we can get really good and beat anyone we play against. The goal of having any board game.
Okay, that's about your mind.
I play to win. So that was Rococo. Here we have Encyclopedia, a Euro we have been particularly enjoying the last few months. And this is a kind of dice worker placement, set collection Euro game, where you're basically putting together the first comprehensive encyclopedia of natural history. So you're kind of trekking around the world, researching different animals, like how they all fit together in their species and genus and all that. And what you're doing is you're going to kind of draw 6 dice out of the bag at the beginning of the round. You're going to roll them, and those dice are your workers. The numbers will mean something. The colors of the dice will mean something. You might get a bonus if you go there with the right color, or you might get something better if you go here with a high number. But that's kind of the brief of what's going on there.
Yeah, so the reason that we like to play this at 2 players is that it is relatively uninteractive. There is a little bit of interaction in that other players can kind of take cards from the central marketplace, like animals and specialist cards that you maybe want. Players can also take dice from your player mat if they want to use your worker. But I like, we do think these are quite minor because at the end of the day, even if you have 4 people, you can also take dice from other players. So even if more people are taking from your mat, you just have more people to take from. So it's like, it doesn't really matter. We also feel like the scaling of the marketplace of the cards, like it isn't proportionate. So there's 6 cards available for animals.
2 or 3 players, I think.
At 2, 3 players, then it goes up to 8 with 4 players. So we just find it's maybe a little bit nicer that you have some more breathing room at lower player counts, because what comes out can be quite random, and this is a lot to do with set collection. So the more players you have, at 4, there's only 8 cards, so it might get a little bit frustrating actually to have less to choose from when it is so focused on set collection. So it's kind of nicer actually to play at 2. The only kind of downside maybe is that in some of the worker placement spaces, the more dice that are already there placed by other players, the better it is for you basically. And obviously with less players, you're not going to be able to kind of reach those higher thresholds as easy. But we feel like this is quite a minor play point compared to the breathing room you get from having like less competition for the marketplace. Yeah,
I mean, one of the biggest criticisms of this game could be that there is a touch of randomness in what comes out and what you need for set collection, because you're kind of matching animals from the same continent or of the same kind of types, because they all have these little subtypes where they live, what they eat, and you're trying to match those up as well. And if you take a 4-player game or even 3-player game, let's say, which is probably more because they have the same number of cards, you just have far less choice and you're far more dependent on what other players leave, and that could become, I think, even more frustrating than it does at 2 players. And the same goes for the specialists you can buy. And actually buying specialists is quite a good way to get those multipliers, because if you have a lot of the same type of card, you get exponentially more points. And they're a really good way to do that in a 2-player game. But if you have 4 players going for them, and these are the same no matter what you're playing at, then obviously it's a different story.
Yeah.
So you also get different mechanisms coming into play. But yeah, I just think it's something that I would enjoy with more, but I do think it works really well at 2.
Yeah, I just don't know what like, it doesn't add much, right?
No, I wouldn't say so, except
nice
playtime.
More people around the table, of course, sometimes, but in gameplay wise,
Yeah, exactly. But we also have a review of this if you want to check it out. That is Encyclopedia.
Okay, so next up we have Great Western Trail, Argentina, which is the sequel to what we think is a classic, Great Western Trail, but this one is set in Argentina. It's by Alexander Pfister. It's a Euro game where you are essentially a cowboy visiting the towns and the cities, all in order to optimize your hand, to do a bit of deck building, because you want to basically get to the end of your route and sell on your cattle for the most money that you can. And what you're going to do with that money is go back to the beginning of your route and do it all again, but hopefully just a little bit better each time you go around the loop, essentially.
Stunning indictment of working for a living. So Argentina is for 2 to 4 players, I believe. Actually, I think 1 to 4 players. I think there's a solo mode. But if you haven't played Great Western Trail, it is a phenomenal Euro that, yeah, it's one of our favorites. And Great Western Trail Argentina is just that, but more. And as with many Euros, it doesn't matter too much the player count you play at. This one is a little more outwardly focused because you're moving around on the central board all the time, but you still do a lot kind of on your own and you're making your own decisions. You're not really rubbing up against other players.
Yeah.
So whether you play at 2, whether you play at 4, the only real difference is the length of play. I mean, it's definitely a game that's, I think, great with more, but you're not really losing anything besides that kind of, you know, player vocal interaction, you could say.
Yeah.
And there are a few crunch points with the marketplaces, but they get bigger with player count. So you're not really losing out there, and there's ways to mitigate them as well. So yeah, it's just, I think whatever you play at, you're going to have a great time, but you could play this at 2 every time and you would not miss out on a thing.
Yeah, I think the only thing that could happen is with more people, maybe there would be more buildings on the map.
That's true.
But that being said, it's definitely a strategy to lean into buildings, right? Mm-hmm. We've had games where, you know, hardly anybody has built any buildings, maybe just 1 or 2. So it could be that you actually have the same amount of buildings on the map in a 4-player game as you would in a 2. It's just totally dependent on what everyone decides to do. So the only implication with that is if there is more buildings, you can only move a certain amount each turn. So it would just take you a little bit longer to go around the loop. You'd probably stop and do some more actions. But yeah, that doesn't always happen. So you might have pretty much the same experience with regards to buildings at 2 than 4. Yeah,
I think as well with the buildings, you could almost argue that it's not something you would miss, because if you're everyone except for the person who has made you pay, because you can have to pay to pass buildings.
Sometimes.
So then it can be really annoying if there's more buildings there, and there's like, you have to keep giving money to people.
Yeah.
So depending how mean you like to play, you might prefer it to.
I never play that strategy, and you always play that strategy.
Gotta pay the toll.
Maybe that's why I don't win.
Gotta pay the troll toll. So that was Great Western Trail Argentina, a brilliant game, and a brilliant game to play at 2 players. Next up, we have Stationfall, and this is what's been called a party game for heavy gamers. It's for, I think, even 1 to 8 players, so definitely a good contender for this list, especially because it's a party game. And in Stationfall, what you're going to be doing is you're all going to have, you could say, a secret character. So the game takes place on a station which is free falling into Earth's orbit, and in 15 minutes it's basically going to explode. or disintegrate or fall apart. And there's a cast of zany characters on the space station, and they all have their own secret agendas, and you're all going to be dealt a character card, and you'll secretly play as one of them, with the twist that you can control anybody on the space station. So there's a bit of like using other characters to kind of cast out on who you are, but then other players might be those characters. So then there's a lot of secrecy, a lot of fun. It's very samey. It's real sandboxy, but surprisingly good at 2 players, despite being something you'd think you'd only want to play with more.
Yeah, and the reason why we think it's good for 2 players is there's a 2-player version where each player will get to control. No, control's the wrong word because you can control any of the characters. You will have 2 secret identities, let's say, along with a bonus character which you're trying to either kill or save, depending on what the objective is.
Yeah.
So because you have like more to care about in the game, so there's 12 characters, and if you know across 2 players you're caring about basically the majority of them, what happens to them, you're pretty involved in that, and it mitigates obviously there being less people to play with around the table. Also, it comes with bots, so you can make it up to an 8-player game if you would like to do that by just using bots, and we thought that they run pretty well.
Yeah.
They get in your way, quite annoying.
Yeah, you found them more annoying. I think we actually found that, so that's not really 2-player specific, but obviously it's nice that you can do that. We found actually that we were happy enough with the 2-player game. We even said in our review of Stationfall, we were surprised by how fun it was. And I think what's interesting is that you kind of play it almost as a 4-player game, because the characters are kept separate, and you play in like 2 different colors for them, but it's not that finicky to control either. No. So obviously, again, this is, I think actually another benefit of Stationfall 2 is this is a hard game to teach because it's a sandbox and there's 50 things going on in it, and you never know which are going to be relevant, and some might never come up in the game, and you have to teach it all so people are aware, and they'll probably still make mistakes. Yeah. And if you're playing with 2 players, it's a lot easier to teach, manage, replay, whereas you obviously don't have to teach 8 people and have 8 types of questions.
Can't even imagine playing with 8 people.
No, and
it's pretty tough even with 2 for me. Like there's a lot of scenarios and actions. Yeah, so that is pretty crazy. Game
length as well on top of that. I think if you went above 4 or 5, it would be really long game.
Yeah.
So you get a nice play time with a lot of the experience at 2 players. But of course, it is a party game, and if you have a good group of friends who this is perfect for, you probably will have a bit more fun with them. Yeah. But again, we would happily keep this and play the 2-player, I think.
Yeah, I think if you can get a group together that will always play, so you don't have to keep teaching, like you said, then okay, great, once everyone knows the rules. And probably we did have a little bit more fun when we played with more people, but that was mainly because we put our own stories to it, I think, rather than like the game mechanisms themselves. Like it was just us making up, giving the characters more character, let's say, rather than something from the game. So yeah, we'd probably be very happy to play it too, even if we never played this again with more people, I would say.
So that was Stationfall, and we will go on to the next game. Now we come to the big guns, Weather Machine, and this is the newest Vital Lacerda game, which came out around the end of last year, I believe, Weather Machine. And I'm not going to go into how it plays because it's a Vital Lacerda game and we don't have time. If you want to get an overview, we have a review of this as well, and you can watch the brief how to play. But you probably are aware of Vital Lacerda games, especially if you're watching us. And they're big, heavy, complex Euros. Often they can be a bit interactive.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily kind of solitaire, is what I'm looking for, type games, which some Euros are. Everything usually flows together quite well, and other players can get in your way, or you might have to work together with them, which is the case here. Yeah. But this is one that we did really enjoy at 2 players, and we've mostly played at 2 players. Mm-hmm. And I think you never want to play it at 4 again.
Yeah, I think obviously the other games in this list, we've said we more either prefer to play at 2 or we're more than happy to play at 2. This one I would actively avoid playing with more.
Yeah.
I don't know, unless everyone has played it before and knows what they're doing. But even then, it's a bit much. I think for us, it's how do we describe it? We've taught our friends Vital Lacerda's before, but with this one, there was so much of it that thematically you couldn't explain in a way, and some different rules that didn't quite fit or weren't that intuitive. So it's a very, very heavy teach and a very heavy play. There's a lot of questions, and because of those rules that sometimes are converse to what you would expect, it's just
it is a game where, and this was in our review, where 2 sections it works this way, 1 section it doesn't work that way. You do this other thing
that we could see at least.
Yeah. So it gets a bit much, and yeah, I think you need to. That's one of the benefits, is that if you only play this at 2 players, you never have to teach anyone ever again.
Yeah.
And you save yourself a lot of time doing that.
Yeah. I guess the only thing to be said for it is, like you said, you have to work together to basically for some of the gameplay, run the weather machines. And the more kind of your personal bots that you send that work with other players' bots, then you might do more, let's say.
Yeah.
But you can still do it with 2 people. It just means that you play the game maybe slightly differently. Right?
You have to work a lot harder, I think, if you want something to pay off. And because you don't scale the spaces if you play at 4 or at 2.
Yeah.
But you also, I think it's still a really robust and good experience. There are a few little rules tweaks. And contrary to what other people have said, I think we found them really easy to pull off. They're really minor.
For 2 players.
Yeah, the rule changes.
Yeah.
It's barely noticeable.
Yeah. Less than some other games, I would say.
Oh yeah, 100% less than other games. So it's something that we really enjoyed. And I think this might be a divisive one, where I think some people, if they're the right group, will love playing this at 4. But it's something that's really good at 2. I mean, we've actually played this game quite a lot, and we really have enjoyed it at 2.
Yeah, I think if we only ever played this at 2, personally, ever again, I would be more than happy with that. In fact, it's my preference.
Yeah, and I don't think it's our favourite of his games, but it is weirdly addictive.
It is very addictive. We played twice back to back one Saturday night, didn't we?
I think we've done that a few times, to be fair.
I think we did.
But yeah.
There was one particular Saturday night I was thinking of, though, where I won both of them.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. That's good for you.
No, it's good for me.
It's good for you. Yeah. Weather machine.
Okay, so that was our latest instalment of our best board games for 2 players, not specifically designed for 2 players series. We really hope that you found this helpful. We have some other videos in this series, and we can link them below in the description box, so please go ahead and check them out if you haven't already. And we really appreciate you watching. If you've not subscribed to our channel, we'd really appreciate it if you could do that. If you aren't familiar with us, we do kind of list content like this, but also mainly reviews of mostly kind of medium to heavyweight games, sometimes lighter weight games. If you could subscribe, we'd really appreciate that. And give us a thumbs up on this video if this was helpful, and please feel free to ask us any questions about the games that we featured down in the comments. We'd be more than happy to answer and discuss them.
100%. And I didn't listen to any of that because I'm petting Svensson. He's very distracting, cute.
Yeah, the dogs have been quite distracting tonight.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't subscribe for us, subscribe for the dogs.
Yeah.
Or comment for the dogs.
Tell
us you like the dogs.
Yeah, we pass all of the feedback on to them, and they love it. But anything else to add?
No, just thanks for watching. It's always really important to us that you're watching this and you're finding the games that you want to play.
Yep. And let us know if you have any recommendations that we should check out. Games that are not specifically designed for 2 players, but you really like to play with 2 players. And we will see you next time. Bye.